Now I have the honor and the privilege to introduce our keynote for the rest of the session. And I'm going to read this so I don't get anything wrong. So, Lateefah Simon is project director at the Rosenberg Foundation at MacArthur Genius and MacArthur Genius Fellow. Ms. Simon is a San Francisco native who became the executive director at the Center for Young Women's Development when she was only 19 years old. The Center for Young Women's Development is the nation's first economic and gender justice organization solely run for and by low-income, informally incarcerated young women. Lateefah then went on to lead the creation of San Francisco's first reentry services division under the leadership of District Attorney Kamala D. Harris and became the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area. Lateefah is a longtime advocate for low-income young women and girls and a founding advisory board member of the Alliance for Girls. So will you join me in welcoming our keynote for today, Lateefah Simon. Thank you.
She's amazing, right? She's amazing. I was standing right there and I was like, I am getting flashbacks of myself. Not the amazing part, but just the gut focus, the myopia on young women. You have that? Of course you're amazing, but I remember. I asked my daughter today, honey, how do I look? And she said, you look like somebody's mama. I do, with the pencil skirt and the Spanx, right? And I am so proud to be here today and honored to be here today because of their sisters like you who exude so much of what we've been praying for and for what our grandmothers have been praying for. This year actually marks 20 years that I have been blessed to be in the field, in the sphere of working for young women and girls. 20 years, I'm 38. And before I begin, I have my mentors in the back, from Marlene Sanchez to the other sisters at the Center for Young Women's Development, who keep us honest every single day about what more we can do. And I actually want to talk a little bit about the work that we do. But before I go on, meaning we, meaning all of us, and again, being so honored to be here today, I grew up and I was born and raised in San Francisco. What a traumatizing thing coming from downtown in a cab up this way. It's just traumatizing in a real way, because the TL now has, for many of us, become a graveyard for our parents, right? The only spaces and places where poor young women live are in public housing or underdeveloped neighborhoods in this city. The same is true in Oakland, and the same is true in Daly City, and the same is true, and you name the city. Economic inequity is so deep and rich. We've not seen anything like this in 30 years. The dot-com boom, when I was starting out, and then it busted, and then it came back, felt different, didn't it? So we ask ourselves, how are young women who are surviving in these communities, who are the least among us, with the least amount of opportunity, but more resilience than we'll ever have in one pinky, how are they surviving? How do they get by? How are they pushing and navigating when they are not in quote-unquote program? How are they moving throughout not only the violence that they are dealing with every single day in community, as you spoke of, but the state violence inflicted upon them every single day in their communities and in their schools? These sisters deserve something a lot more than even we are giving. So before I talk about what we're not doing, there's always that. I actually really want to thank every single soldier in this room who's dedicated their lives to young women and girls. And thank you for creating space and place for young women to dream and to step outside of both the sociological, the economic, the spiritual, and historical bondage that many of us grew up in and live with. I still sometimes slip and call myself a young woman, and I forget I got a college-age daughter right now. I gotta remember it's they, not we. That's hard, you know. I'll be in rooms and I'm like, the youth. That was my whole identity for a really long time. And it's so hard, especially when you wear Spanx now and control heels that don't actually have, because I'm scared of falling. See all you young sisters doing the work who you think you'll never be in those places, watch it. Now I talk about intergenerational alliances. Whereas before, I would say young people absolutely need their own space and place to develop their power. And I want to talk about that a little bit more. As I think about the 20 years that I've had as an opportunity to work in the Bay Area on behalf of young women and girls and work for young women and girls, the best thing that I've learned is to be a listener. So going back to thanking you for building space and place, I want to thank the institutions that we coexist in for allowing us to push, for allowing ourselves to work ourselves out of our jobs. Because isn't in fact that the goal? Isn't it in fact the goal that we want to create women so strong, spaces so fierce, families so inept to live without us? Institutions that are developed to create communities and strong communities. I just want to work ourselves out of our industry. An industry that is relying upon poverty. Can we just have this living room conversation? Our industry, you talked about industry, this sector is reliant among young women not having space and place and voice. As we continue to work ourselves out of our jobs, it may take 2 to 3 generations, but in the Bay Area, if we organize in the way in which we need to organize, there will be gender-specific services in our schools. Young women and girls who've gone through the worst of the worst will have the opportunities and capacity to compete with the best. Stanford will be their playing grounds, not Tenderloin Parks where there are needles and dope pipes. We will figure out ways to unite girls across race and class so they themselves have the opportunity to explore the intersectionalities of race. They understand how to explore the intersectionality of being queer, of being poor, of oppression, of their historical significance on this planet. Girls' services must be looked at differently. We are living in a moment. There hasn't been young people of color in the streets like this since 1968. We are living in a moment for the first time. You turn on the news, you open the paper, and race and gender, front page, beginning story. So what does that mean for our girls? It is not enough to build their self-esteem. It is not enough to simply pay them for their worth. It is not enough to just provide them with a mentor. It is not enough to just make sure they get to school on time. It is not enough to assume that they will not be incarcerated because what we are doing is so helpful. Those are our goals. I want to encourage all of us to dream a little bit more. Because if we continue to operate, myself included, in a deficit model, if my goal is to increase this recidivism by 67%, no. Let's back up a little bit. Our sector has created the mindset, even in the best of institutions, that our girls are pathologies. Let's have a living room conversation here. Let's back up a little bit and think about Harriet Tubman and Bell Hooks. Let's think about Eleanor Roosevelt. Let's think about the little girl down the street who survives every single day, and she's being abused, and she is being raped, and she is living in a dope house, and yet she smiles. Everything is possible for her. Not because of what we give her, but because of who she is and that she is a God-given, brilliant soul who deserves everything. Everything that we do for her is owed to her. Owed to her. For the little girl who lives in Palo Alto and goes to gun high school and thinking that she might kill herself and she has everything she needs, but her spirit is dying. Everything we do for her is owed to her. We work for her. The Alliance for Girls, more now than ever, our voice is required Because there is no solidified voice for young women and girls in California. Let's have the living room conversation. Girls and young women are being ignored in the legislature, although we have more women in seats, elected seats, in Sacramento than most of the states west of the Mississippi. The fact that push-out rates for girls of color, despite the amazing advocacy that's going on around the state, is still ridiculous and embarrassing. The fact that in San Francisco, black girls under the age of 24 are arrested 20 times more in the Tenderloin than their white counterparts who are still on the streets as well is embarrassing. The fact that, I'll say it, I love working for a foundation because nobody will fire me. That's the other thing. I used to be scared when I would have to raise money and stuff. I can't say that. But the fact that in the Bay Area, we aren't storming City Hall every single day requiring that young women and girls come first. Why? Because young women and girls and their mamas are the reasons why our communities are erect today. I was at a conference last week and we were talking about criminal justice reform, and it was like, hello. Women and girls are the backbone for criminal justice reform. Think about when our folks come home, where do they come to? Auntie, mama, baby mama, sister, cousin. Who are our healthcare workers? Who are the women in front of chalkboards every single day in the state of California raising a nation on pennies? We have an opportunity to create a new vision for the plight of young women. And I want to introduce what I think some of that vision should be. And while I got the opportunity late in life at the old age of 26 to go into university, Mills College, by the way. First of all, what is this thing we're still telling young women to go to vocational school? And in programs, we're saying college isn't for everybody. And it's mostly college-educated women telling uneducated young women that college isn't for everybody. University is for everybody. It's for everybody. It's for everybody. Would you take back your college education? Don't think about the loans right now. Don't think about the loans, because I would. Right? I'd trade them in a second. And I'm always tangential when I'm with young women and girls service providers, because what we do is so important. In my 20 years of blessings of working on behalf of this population come out, I want every single girl that we work with to have the opportunity that my baby girl had. And I was 18 years old and pregnant. And her stress, it's like, oh, I'm so stressed out. My papers, my finals. Oh my God, I'm so stressed out. She lives in the dorm. She tans. She's a little light skinned, so she tans. It's like when I was 18, I was pregnant with you doing outreach in the Tenderloin to other sex workers who had nothing to do but to survive. And you're so stressed out. But anyway. Me and Marlene have this conversation all the time about raising this new generation of hopefully working class and middle class kids and strong girls, and what that's been like as workers in this work, and it's deep. But I have, speaking about university, when I went back to school to study public policy, I understood in all the years of working with young women and waging campaigns on system and winning campaigns and pushing forth what we believe to be true, and how, for me, that was the best youth development that I've experienced, challenging systems, understanding the powers that create oppression, understanding what we were owed as human beings on this earth, as womb carriers, as freedom fighters, understanding that young people didn't deserve, because of whom they were born to, particular conditions. I thought about talking to you all today and presenting a 3 to 5 point plan on how to get free, how to create new paradigms. But see, we already know what they are because we listen to young women. We already know what they are. And in the institutions oftentimes that we even run because of philanthropy and the competition that it creates. Now I'm in philanthropy, I get to talk about how awful it is. It's awful. And how it keeps us divided. We even begin to develop these constructs of how we can't work together. We stop listening because there are no blue ribbon studies for what Guadalupe says, who's from the mission. She says what she needs, but what she's saying she needs is not It's not qualified by, you name the institute, right? You name whether it's OJJDP or this Women's Commission or the Commission on the Status of X, Y, and Z. If we listen to girls and their words, we will understand the vision for moving forward. The idea that Bell Hooks presented to me as a young woman leading an organization, not a fiscally sponsored organization. The Center for Young Women's Development started in 1996, including my sister Marlene. We were uneducated, and yet we ran and raised millions of dollars and passed audits and employed our own and created programs that freed the psychological and spiritual bondage that systems had placed upon other young women like ourselves. So I ask us all to think about revolutionizing the way in which we work, thinking about young women as brilliant freedom fighters instead of putting forth their pathologies. I ask us today to think about moving forward outside of our titles and our positions and claiming that we came to this work because our soul brought us to this work. I ask us to think about reading Brian Stevenson's most recent book, Have Mercy, where he says, we do this work with broken people because we are broken. I ask us to think about not standing behind our grant applications, but behind our moral conviction to free the girls. What if the moral conviction that we came in together as this alliance was about true freedom in our schools, in our communities, in our workplaces, that we would create as hunters and gatherers and warriors that we are? We represent the four directions of this beautiful globe. Who are we not to step in front and to wage war on the nonprofit industrial complex that puts women last? We can create in the Bay Area collaboration that not only works, but that is driven by soul and freedom. We can do it. No one at this moment is yelling at the top of the mountaintop. Imagine if all of us had bullhorns and we sung and screamed in unison. Can you imagine the force of the young women that we work for standing in front of us and us holding them to ensure that they had everything they needed, not only to survive, but to champion their worst fears? That is our job. We can do, because we did it with no computers at home, with horrible syntax. We can write grants at night with our babies under the desk. We did it. They're still doing it. These sisters right here, you doing it right now. We can do that. That's the easy part. The difficult part of freeing the girls is freeing our own expectations of what they can't do. Gotta start there first. If we don't deeply believe in that warrior spirit of the most broken sister that we work with, that is when we need to change jobs. I love what I've been able to do over the years. And it also pains me so much that there's so much left to do and that we've come not so far. Last week, and I swear I'm gonna end. Everybody's like, I gotta go home. I gotta pick up my kids. I'm sorry. Last story. Last week, I went with a group of funders down to Los Angeles County to visit the Linwood Jail, which is the world's biggest women's jail, not prison. There are 2,000 women in custody right now, but it has a capacity for 3,000 women. And despite the pushes for criminal justice reform in the state, from AB 109 to Proposition 47, so many of the young women that we were able, and they're young, the median age is 26. That used to be old to me. I'm like, we as a young women's organization, you over 25, you can't be here. Now I'm like, young women under 29, in 2 years it'll be under 39. So I'm with these funders and from all over the state, and we're going into this horrific place where we are still locking up and separating women for stealing clothes from their children. We are still doing that in this state. We're still separating women from their children in their communities for nonviolent crimes. We have still not figured out for women who've been abused all their lives, who commit violent crimes, we're still breaking them away from the hearts that can heal them. But that's not the point. So we go on this tour, and I've been to hundreds of facilities throughout the country, whether it's group homes where young women are being chained and incarcerated and drugged, to actual level 4 prisons. Linwood was the worst for many reasons, because they had and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen, worse than Alameda, worse than San Francisco. They had a unit, and it was called Discipline. And literally the women there were mostly 25, 26. They were Black and Latina and poor white girls, and they were being disciplined because of their actions in the larger jail. And of course I asked, I don't care, you gonna fire me, you gonna kick me out? How do we expect young women to heal and be better when they're caged up for 48 hours a day and then allowed to have a 1-hour shower, never let outside? And you all are giving them something called Duke balls. Does anybody work with young women in prison and know what that is? It was the worst thing I've ever heard. It's a punishment of food. It's the most awful food you could ever eat. And when you're on discipline, that's what you get. You get that only 2 times a day. There was a young woman that I met who had just given birth to her baby 48 hours earlier and had to go back into discipline, and this is her diet. Her baby is not allowed to nurse. The young woman from the Center for Young Women's Development years ago won a right to breast milk campaign in San Francisco, and it was all girls under 25, by the way. Big ups. So I'm crying, and I got so used to seeing young women in lockdown that I just thought it was what happened. But my separation from being in lockdown for the last few years, it gauged my spirit. I ask us to step away a little bit from our work and do self-care, because when you come back in and you actually see the conditions that the young women that you're working for are living in or being housed in, it inspired me. We went upstairs, and I'm with some pretty fancy funders. I still have my silver toenail polish, still gotta be me, feeling good. And I was like, wow, I wonder if I'll see somebody that I know. No, this was LA. As soon as I walk in, I see a young woman that we work with for years, and she's in LA. She's locked up, she's away from her kids, and she's Lateefah! And all the funders like, oh my God, that's so cool. You know this girl. And I'm like, it's awful. What haven't we done so that girls that we met when they were 17 are 32 in county jails for nonviolent crimes? The years that we've been working in public housing and disenfranchised schools, girls that we once loved, their babies are in the exact same position that they were in 20 years ago. And while the 5 go to college, the 15 are dying. It is optional to do the work as is. But if we could truly commit to being revolutionary about the urgency of freeing our girls, and it is not just from confinement, physical confinement. It's freeing the spaces that we have built. It's freeing the spaces that they are confined in emotionally and spiritually, historically and educationally, because it's their time. Thank you so much.